Hello guys and gals, me Mudahar, and I kind of want to work off the video we made yesterday talking about why you should never use ChatGPT. Not because, it's in my opinion probably the worst LLM chatbot that you can use. And by the way, I'm not talking about other things that OpenAI produces. They obviously make things like codecs, people who use this stuff to actually write code. No, I'm talking about basic fucking ChatGPT that it seems like everyone and their grandma needs to use to do like a simple web search on the internet these days, because basic Google search sucks so much dog shit that a lot of people are now relying on LLMs that hallucinate all the fucking time to look up shit on the internet, regurgitating information from AI slop websites all day. I have a serious disdain for ChatGPT, not because I'm somebody that's against progress. I love technology. I'm even going to come here and say I think AI shit is pretty fucking cool. Local artificial intelligence. I made a video yesterday where I showed you guys how to run this shit on your actual computer. And no, you didn't need a 4090 or a 5090 to run some of these models that exist. And you know what? Once you connect that shit to the internet, you'd be surprised at how good this stuff can be, even in comparison to the biggest shit on the largest platforms. But of course, ladies and gentlemen, one of the things that I kind of wanted to do that unfortunately I think I've completely given up on is building a local AI super server in my home. Something that I could control my whole house with, run my Docker containers, run my gaming systems all in a nice server rack that would be in my basement and just basically plug through the rest of my house with thin clients. Some real home of the future type shit. And why did I end up basically cutting that out? Well, I'm going to show you what RAM prices look like, okay? So these are DDR5 RAM prices. I'm currently on DDR4 RAM. My system is actually quite a few years old. I don't really have that much of a reason to upgrade. And even if I do want to upgrade, one of the things that I did back in the day was buy 128 gigs of memory, Like, here's my system. Like, if you look at it, man, I've got a simple little, not a super simple system, but I've got around 128 gigs of memory. Back then I ended up buying this for like probably $300 to $400. I had the money for it, and I was like, you know what? This is a real enthusiast grade upgrade. I was actually doing a lot of super virtual machine stuff, even in my personal time, as well as on YouTube. And so I figured, might as well be a good buy. And I think it might be the best investment that I ever made because the return on it is fucking insane. If you go back to the store and end up trying to purchase this shit, it'll end up costing you around $2,600. $2,600 fucking dollars. Yes, we're at a point where memory is just that fucking expensive. And here's the thing, this is not like new information. The reality of it is I've been digging a little bit deeper into this, and it feels like OpenAI is one of those scumbag companies that kind of raised the prices for RAM through their actions and never actually followed through with some of their plans. So let me show you exactly what's going on. If you go to apple.com right now and you build yourself this Mac Studio, so I ended up basically making the most expensive setup, which costs around $7,800 US. And the reason why I would end up actually buying this is for what you're getting, and if you're going to do things like LLM stuff, this might actually be one of the cheaper options to get in on the ground floor compared to obviously spending an arm and a leg buying things like the DGX supercomputers and stuff that can do certain things better than this, but overall, this is still going to be the better option. Well, if you end up trying to fucking buy this, ladies and gentlemen, you end up getting that gray continue button. Don't matter where you live. You could live in New York, you could live in fucking Los Angeles, you could live in any major city in the US, Canada, any place. And I'll tell you right now, this shit is unavailable for fucking pickup. Why? Because the memory manufacturing industry has basically said that till like 2027, like at the very least, and realistically, you're looking at 2029, 2030 of all places, when this actual shortage of memory starts to dissipate a little bit. So why do we have a shortage of memory? Well, a lot of the big AI bros are buying it. But the other big reality of it is that companies like OpenAI, basically Sam Altman, scumbag Altman I like to call him, flew all the way over to countries like South Korea, talked to basically the two largest memory companies, which was Samsung Electronics, SK Hynix, And effectively, in this situation, he had locked up around 40% of the global supply. Now, I didn't know it at the time, and really, I don't think many people did, but this was not a binding letter of intent. It literally was just, hey, we might buy this memory, but you know what was funny? They never ended up actually fucking buying it. This asshole raised the expectations for a lot of these companies to drop all of the regular plebeians like us, because these companies were thinking, oh shit, OpenAI is going to start buying from us, Amazon's going to start buying from us, Anthropic's going to start buying from us, all these big AI data centers are going to be buying from us. And they were salivating at the thought that, well, fuck the average Andy, why take Muda's $1,000 when Sam Altman's $6,000 are obviously worth a lot fucking more? That only matters, you fucking scumbags, if this piece of shit was gonna pay you to begin with, which he has not. Sam Altman apparently has had so many fuck-ups through OpenAI, which, to explain to you what's kind of going on, we saw it like literally about a month ago. Sora, that their little like video sharing platform, died because guess what? Nobody likes generative video slop on their fucking platform. You might generate a few videos here and there on Sora, but you're not going to open the fucking app and go, oh yeah, let's just keep going through all of this AI garbage. Most people don't even like reading AI slop on the... You know why I hate reading comments on basically most social media platforms? Because every time I see that fucking M dash, I know for a fact the person or bot behind the account generated a artificial response that looks somewhat human, but obviously isn't. It makes browsing the internet, participating in the internet, talking to people on the internet kind of a useless thing. I miss the fucking days where I could go onto an old school forum, yap it up with random fucking nobodies, and have a good time on a Friday night. Now, even that tiny little bit of joy has been yoinked away by these scumbags in Silicon fucking Valley. And a lot of it is ultimately down to these guys not even following through with the purchases that they said they were gonna make. So again, obviously, this happened all the way back last year. And basically throughout this year, it's kind of been a slow reckoning of like the reality of the AI bubble itself kind of deflating, not entirely popping in a dramatic sense, but definitely a deflation. I think a lot of people have realized that this technology definitely is useful, right? Like for a lot of people that write code, for a lot of people that do things agentically that are actually providing value to the world, there is some value to artificial intelligence models. That's partially the reason why even if this bubble pops, all of this technology will still be there. I literally made a video yesterday showing you some actual use cases that you can run locally on your system without giving your fucking data or giving your dollars to Scam Altman, okay? You can run a lot of this stuff locally. Sure, it might not be as good because you're not running, fucking trillion parameter model in your system, but for most people, if you know how to prompt it, you know how to use it, the local stuff can actually be pretty good. But the reality of all this is, ladies and gentlemen, is one thing that I've noticed is as these guys continuously buy up shit, the ownership of computers or the ownership of compute has very much dramatically, almost overnight, shifted from basically people having access to computers, having access to enthusiast-grade parts, and overnight losing them. It's kind of crazy when you look at how awful it has been to be a computer owner in the last several years. You had COVID, which fucked up prices so much to the point that people dream of like 2019 and before, right? Like a better time, a better era where things were priced a lot better than they were now. Ever since prices jumped up since COVID, they really haven't gone back since. Then you had the crypto bros that sort of jumped in with their NFTs, their mining nonsense, where everyone was just buying GPUs out en masse, and anybody that actually wanted to purchase a GPU for, their home experiments or playing video games was priced out of even that. But now the AI stuff is even worse because it's not just the GPUs, it's not just the RAM, it's even the processors, it's even the SSDs. It's almost every component that we use to put together into a computer, all priced up. It'd be one thing if, RAM was super expensive, but everything else kind of dropped down in price because then I guess you could compensate the price gain with the price loss. But when everything is just raised through the roof, it's not a good look. Now, look, in the last few weeks, I've looked at a lot of AI technology because generally that's kind of what my thing is right now. I've just been kind of using this new tech. Like it's sort of me enjoying and experimenting with stuff. One of the things that kind of came out was this thing called TurboQuant, which allows you to use some of these large models, put them onto your GPU, and use them with far more context than what we were supposed to. It's actually very, very newly implemented. Like we're talking something that is barely a month old at this point. But obviously, when you look at the memory prices, you would think that even with optimizations that are coming in, maybe there would be a crash. And in some cases, one sort of trend kind of crashed a little bit, right? You had these 2x8 gig RAM sticks that went from around 170 all the way down to 150. But if you look at it, it's about 2x8 gig RAM sticks. Obviously, this is not what the big tech companies are necessarily purchasing. They're purchasing the stuff that's faster. So obviously the RAM sticks that are, faster, a higher capacity, those are actually still holding strong. Those are still holding their prices. You can see it by the actual price trend right over here. A DDR4 3600 kit that's 2x32 gigs all the way back. We're talking around the time basically I built my computer, and this is way before 2024 even, right? We're talking 2022. You would look at a price of $200, and now that same stick is above $1,000. It's no joke when you look at how bad these prices are. And unfortunately, because of the actual constraints in producing memory, because no, it's not something that you can put together in just any factory. There's very few companies that make it, and those companies that do make it are frankly being bought out, at least their stock, or at least it's being promised to a lot of these AI scumbag companies. One of the things that you probably saw the other day was this company called Allbirds, which Allbirds, for anybody that doesn't know, is a company that deals with shoes. So for instance, if you go to their actual website, again, they literally are a shoe company. So how the fuck did this shoe company decide to go all the way up and nearly double its value, right? Like if you look at their 5-day, they went from being valued at $2.58 a share all the way up to, at their peak, $21.95. I mean, that is a fucking huge gain. If you're somebody that's running this company, you're basically dining and whining and having a great time. You're up 340% in the last 5 days. They're holding strong. What I've seen a lot of people not talk about is obviously what they said that they were going to do. They're not just turning into an AI company. They're actually not doing anything regarding artificial intelligence. What they're actually doing over here, if you look carefully, is they're actually raising money to go into AI compute infrastructure. So they're not designing artificial intelligence. What they've done is they've taken a bunch of money and they bought a bunch of GPUs, a bunch of computer components. Basically, they're making a data center that allows them to rent out GPUs as a service. So right over here, you can see what they call a GPU ass. Literally ass in this case. And what this allows you to do is basically you can go to any of these companies right now and you can just purchase a GPU as a service. So remember, GPUs come in all shapes and sizes. They're not all GPUs are designed to run video games. A lot of them are just used to sit inside data centers where you can patch into and use them to perform calculations and a lot of the stuff that, is done for AI and a bunch of other types of calculations that exist. So for instance, let's say you want to get like a $20,000 fucking GPU. Well, instead of paying $20,000 for the GPU, let's say you only need it for like an hour or two for your compute. Well, you go to any of these companies, like for instance, this one right here, you fill in your name, you fill in a quote, and you can rent this for, at the time, I would say like a few dollars per hour. So you're basically renting it. It's like renting a car. That's what this company Allbirds is doing. And basically, we live in this insane AI mania where, again, a lot of these companies are, and a lot of these investors are putting money into it because they think that immediately companies like Allbirds, because of them building this infrastructure, they might end up getting bought out by some of these big AI companies because they need all the fucking compute and power in the world out there. But we're at this point where even the investors, and in some cases the government, is having a bit of an issue trying to see what's the future for this industry. You know, if you've been following the news regarding like OpenAI and a lot of their connection to the government, they've kind of been like sort of backing away. And the reality of like these people not even being binding to the shit that they're saying is sort of coming out. You know, again, none of this stuff regarding Stargate was something that was really going to be, from my understanding, totally binding in every capacity. So I feel like in a lot of ways, some of the biggest companies have started to move towards things like cybersecurity, where, you know, to prove their worth to the government and why they're deserving of around $1 trillion and plus is by saying, listen, if you don't get us, how are you going to stop this new wave of cyber warfare that's starting, right? You know, it's one of the reasons why things like that Claude Mythos was starting to be a huge thing in today's day and age, where people are saying, look, this nuclear grade cyber warfare tool has been released, and it's even come out that, you know, as much as the US government hates companies like Anthropic, surprisingly the NSA is using their shit to again deal with cyber warfare down the road. And again, look, a lot of these big AI companies have kind of like they're trying to, in my opinion, at least desperately find a way to prove their actual worth for what it is. And I'm not saying that at any moment these people are going to go away out of nowhere. It's not going to happen. These people will always be around. Some companies might completely falter, in my opinion, and I think, you know, it's going to be like the people with the strongest model sort of survive, and the ones that are sort of here are going to go the way of the dot-com crisis that happened all the way back in the fucking 90s. But the reality of it is that these people have really just, in a way, long-term, like, in a long-term sense, damaged the ability for you and I to own a fucking computer. And in some ways, they've kind of damaged the way that we interact with people on the internet anyways. You know, years ago, when you saw the first generated, like, image, or when you saw the first, like, GPT chatbot, it was kind of a novel thing to see. But as soon as it started to just become as expansive as it was, you just start to see the degradation of the internet and just the degradation of like how we communicate with people in general, right? Like, I'm not saying the world of Metal Gear Solid 2 is a reality. Like, the Patriots AIs were actually sentient and fucking smart, unlike the LLM models that we have in today's day and fucking age. Now, again, I'm not somebody that's super duper against this kind of technology. I would have a lot of respect for companies like ChatGPT or OpenAI or Anthropic or any of these organizations if they weren't actively destroying and taking away the ownership of computers, or at least diverting it into a world where only the people at the top are the ones that are building these big compute stacks. And really, I think the future for us, at least in the long term, is instead of owning our own computers and running this technology locally, it's going to be us purchasing barely, like, you know, functional systems and then connecting to these services to do very basic things, right? And somehow I kind of feel that, you know, in a world where search engines are kind of turning to complete shit and a lot of people are going towards things like ChatGPT, this technology either has to be completely free and able to access by anybody, or we're really going to get to a point where access to information is literally just locked down to whoever can actually pay. And the reality is, it's probably the latter in that case, because this technology is so computationally expensive that a lot of these companies, you know, if it isn't for that VC funding that they're constantly getting, we're really going to be at a situation where, you know, I think the realities of the cost are going to become more and more apparent to even the person that's just sitting in front of the monitor like you and me. So obviously, look, there's a lot of options that exist in the open space too. Like today, one of the things that I saw was a 1.1 trillion parameter model, trillion, by the way, something that would be deployed in the big AI companies, is actually available to download right now. In fact, less than 500 people have downloaded it. Why? Because you'd need that AI supercluster that I was dreaming of building to even think of running this, right? But ultimately, I'm not going to be able to build that because, hey, guess what? At the end of the day, people like Scam Altman have effectively turned the world of building computers, or just the technology that we love in general, into one of the most expensive pieces of technology, all based on hype that has yet to be fucking realized and promises that are basically not even being delivered. You know, it's one thing if this guy actually did buy all the fucking RAM in the world and the prices had just jumped up out of nowhere. But the fact that he just committed to purchasing this memory. And apparently those deals fell through, and those prices are still where they're at because, let's be completely real, the people selling this hardware are so fucking greedy that they're just holding out and waiting for the next set of data centers to open and selling it to those companies instead of actually just giving everyone full access to even purchasing this stuff at a reasonable cost, mind you. That we are in the most insane fucking end times when it comes to this stuff, and it's hard not to be kind of a negative person about this because really what positivity do we kind of have when it comes to the tech world that we love, when it comes to the technology that we enjoy? You know, if this stuff happened back in the day, if this kind of technology released like 15 years ago, you know, I don't think that many of us sitting here would be playing around with our gaming computers. Many of us many of us would probably be sitting with like computers that could barely fucking run the games of today, you know? Because the hardware is just gotten completely fucking expensive. And it's kind of insane to me to see that not only has it gotten expensive, but it's going to remain this expensive till at least 2027, like at least 2030 in the worst of expectations. This is one of the reasons why, right? Like, you know, you look at handheld gaming computers like the Steam Deck, right? The prices on these have been increasing, not the Steam Deck in specific, but things like the Legion Lenovo Go. And of course, when you look at prices like a PlayStation, those have been going up several times throughout at least the PS5's lifespan. And I wouldn't doubt if it's going to happen to, obviously, the new Xbox that's coming out, if it's going to happen to the Switch too. Because nobody is immune from this. Companies like Apple are finding it hard to source memory and sell some of their higher end shit. And gamers like you and me, you know, unless you're willing to rip out your fucking kidney and sell it, you're not getting a fucking computer anytime soon. I mean, that's... You know, it's one of the reasons why I'm so self-hosted and so much towards telling you to not use this kind of technology is I want to see at some point a mass exodus, whether it be because these people keep raising their prices or they keep lobotomizing these models so that they can sell you something for more, when it obviously has its quality degraded. I'm looking at you, Anthropic. But we're at this point where, like, I feel like the only way to crash this even harder is for people to learn that, listen, at some point you're going to have to boycott this shit. If you want to access this technology, you might have to even consider using a lower version of it on your local system, because anytime you keep giving any form of information to these guys, it gives them one extra number to show to these investors. Of course, until the end. Make the end come quicker, man. Like, make the world normal again. You know? Because this insanity has got to fucking stop. In my opinion, at least. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. I am out.